Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Julianna Forlano. This is the Political Voices Network. We got a great show for you today. Of course, we're going to start off with the headlines where we cover some of the big news of the week. Of course, we're going to talk about the indictments. We're going to talk about my favorite story, which came out of Montana this week. A little bit of good news. And then we're going to cover some shenanigans going down in Der Fuhrer DeSantis land about education. And then I've got a great guest who's talking about something else that's happening in education. I don't want to be too cryptic here, but I also don't want to give it away. That's happening in California that is the exact positive opposite of the negative stuff that's happening in Florida. So we've got a fight on our hands. It's going to be a great show. I hope you'll stick with me. First up, the headlines. Obviously, the biggest story of the week, the BFD news, was, well, how can I put this? The devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for some votes to steal. He was in a bind because he was way behind, and he was willing to make a deal. But that deal is crashing in all around him and his buddies in the form of indictments. The orange devil went down to Georgia, and now he and 18 of his former henchmen have been indicted by a grand jury in Atlanta. Thank you, Atlanta. Thank you, grand jury. Thank you, Fannie Willis. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing your best to hold this man to account. Anyway, he's being indicted for orchestrating a criminal enterprise to reverse the 2020 election. I am highly enthusiastic about how all the good people are fighting back against the death cult that is marching upon us in this country. And I do think Donald Trump is basically evil incarnate. Perhaps you might call him the Antichrist. Is Donald Trump the Antichrist? Let's take a look at this little video that I made. Is Donald Trump the Antichrist? Is he the guy from the book of Revelations, the father of lies? Well, he did make false or misleading claims more than 30,000 times during his presidency alone. And that was, of course, before January 6th, when the big lie came out. So, father of lies, check. His family owns 666 Fifth Avenue, another check. He fooled millions of evangelical followers of Jesus, just as the beast is supposed to have done. He's got them wearing the mark of the beast on their forehead. And of course, he consorts with whores and criminals. Check, check, checkity, check, check. Now, I can't, of course, say if he is the Antichrist, but if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck and it smells like sulfur, he's probably the Antichrist. By the way, it was the book of Revelations that used the word whores. I understand that Stormy Daniels is to be referred to as a sex worker, but John the Elder was not super woke when penning his piece about the end of days, which wound up in the Bible. All right. Anyway, moving on. My favorite story of the week has got to be the one out of Montana. Did you see this? A group of young people won a landmark lawsuit when a judge ruled that the state's failure to consider climate change when approving fossil fuel projects was unconstitutional. This is another BFD. It's the first case to be one of its choice. They have been litigating this for more than a decade, which I think is it's nice to know that as much as fascism has been on the mark, people fighting corporate fascism, and again, this death cult they've also been on the march, and now they've actually made the news cycle. The big deal about this, of course, is that it sets a precedent. The fossil fuel industries are fighting it tooth and nail. The judge presiding in the case went with the science that actually proves that things happening in Montana, to put it mildly, don't just stay in Montana. Montana's got coal mining, they've got fossil fuel extraction, they've got a number of polluting industries that, because of the amount that they pull out of the ground and use, except not just use, but pull out of the ground and sell and ship and etc., that is affecting not only the rest of the world, but also the kids in Montana because of the bulk of it. And that is how they proved that they're breaking their own constitution, which says that young people have a right to a healthful environment. And that's amazing. Now, be on the lookout for others. There are other states that have that written in their constitutions as well. So I would assume that industry lobbyists would start lobbying your state representatives to take out any kind of language that suggests that people who live there have a right to a healthful environment. So be on the lookout for that. They are not going to rest these fossil fuel folks, but this again does set a precedent. And it gives me hope. I guess that's enough just for a day. It sets a precedent for other legal cases to protect the rights of children against corporations, especially now. Like there's really no excuse anymore. You could be like, well, how else are we going to light up our lights? How else are we going to keep the sign on 24 hours a day at Yogurtville so everyone knows it's there even when it's closed? How are we going to do these very important things for society without fossil fuels? Well, we can use the other technologies that are being developed, and we should and could transition as soon as possible. So that how we're going to do it thing is just not even a decent argument anymore, which is awesome. I'm thrilled. In an area that I'm not thrilled, but then, by the way, will turn into something that I'm thrilled about. Now that the new school year is starting, we've got another story we've got to look into. Of course, DeSantis is in the news, along with other states, as the right wing tries to weaponize the education system, public education in our country. But of course, especially in Florida. There was a story that didn't make much of a splash in the mainstream news. I did hear it on other shows on the Political Voices Network and on Thom Hartmann's program. Other true progressive shows, not just like corporate progressive shows. Anywho, the story is that in addition to removing Black history and relationship-based materials like Romeo and Juliet, because apparently it's too hot and heavy after 400 years. After 400 years of people reading it, it's just too hot and heavy for the curriculum. After removing Black history, Romeo and Juliet, and other things like that from the curriculum, Ron DeSantis and his minions have gone on to approve climate denial videos for use in schools. So that's great. Goodbye, science. They're adding this. Now, these videos are made by Prager University. The talking points are straight out of the fossil fuel company's playbook, the ones that they've been using to deny what they've been doing in terms of destroying our world knowingly. The ones you've heard before. Here they are, right in this article in Scientific American. They are saying that climate activists are like Nazis, which is terrifying because they're going to start shooting them and putting them in jail. I guess they've already done that. I won't go into that Cop City thing where a climate activist was basically shot for loving what is supposed to be loved here in the world. Life. Another talking point, of course, wind and solar power pollute the earth and make life miserable, which is just right out of, again, the Goebbels playbook. Fossil fuels are literally polluting the earth and making life miserable. And they just turn that around and blame it on, I guess, what they see as their nemesis. The other talking point is that recent global and local heat records are reflecting natural temperature cycles that we've just never seen in our lifetimes because it's natural. Florida is the first state to allow these Prager University materials in public schools, and I was taken aback when I read that Florida public schools have roughly 3 million students. That's more than the entire population of Kansas, people. Florida's becoming a little baby fascist factory. And somehow, as I was reading that, I was reminded of like the Lord of the Rings, where they're pressing out their fighting force, these evil orcs. They're just constantly making them. And I think that's where Florida, that's where Florida comes in. They're just trying to make the next generation of hateful, not just ill-educated, not just poorly educated, but absolutely like the opposite of education and hateful little beings to come out of there. This is what the orcs look like in Lord of the Rings, by the way. They're just gross and disgusting. And I looked it up. In the Book of Lost Tales, the orcs were, I thought this was kind of funny, bred from the heats and slimes of the earth. Boy, heat and slime. I think Florida shores are covered with slime, if I remember correctly, in a recent story. And it's blazing hot there, not just on land, but in the water too. So that tracks. But then Tolkien changed this because he didn't want that sorcerer to be able to create life. So I guess orcs were created from corrupted elves. I think that one tracks too. DeSantis and his minions are trying to corrupt the little people, the children. Anyway, oh, by the way, while I was looking up all this because I have to do research for this podcast, I was looking up my orc history, and I found out, not that one. I found out that that Elijah Wood said that Harvey Weinstein was used as inspiration for an orc in Lord of the Rings. Take a look-see. Now, I don't remember in the movie if this disgusting orc was sexually assaulting the actresses, but I'll just leave it at that. But here, look, there's some really good news. Not out of Florida, of course, but out of California. Let me move the orcs out of the way. You don't need to see them. The good news that I want to report in the education front is in California, they're starting to mandate media literacy be taught in schools. And that, of course, is the ability to think critically. I feel that should already be taught in schools. But this is specifically about the ability to evaluate media for its truth content, to tell truth from falsehood, to source claims, and all of that good stuff. So in California, they're making smart, educated, media-savvy thinkers. And in Florida, they're making fascist orcs. Who will win this battle for the future? Oh, by the way, back in that Florida story, the insidious thing that those videos from Prager University are doing is that they also target parents themselves, saying, if you want to be a good parent, you have to be teaching your kids these things. And they show the kids these videos, suggesting to them that any parent who is teaching facts is actually a bad parent. Now, I have kids of my own. I have a kid of my own. And anyone who has kids knows that they often don't want to listen to you. And that's where teachers come in, because they're basically strangers, and the kids have this sense of, being out in the world, being able to be independent, etc. And they will listen to the teacher. So this thing about splitting the parents from the kids, I find to be absolutely, absolutely disgusting. But back to the good news, our guest coming up today is coming on to talk about this movement for media literacy. It's actually going to be, as I said, mandated in California. His name is Nolan Higdon. He is a professor and an activist and an author. I've had him on my program before. He's always really interesting and fun to talk to. You've probably seen him on other outlets like MSNBC and different places. Let's take a listen. I just kind of jump straight into the conversation with him. So here's my bit of an intro, and then we'll take a listen. Guess what California schools are doing? Bringing media literacy education to the schoolroom, trying to teach kids critical thinking, how to tell disinformation and misinformation from actual useful information, useful to the democracy that we hope they will be participating in as they come of age, etc. But as with all good things here in the United States, the corporations are trying to get their talons into it and basically make it so that you think the way they would have you to think. How can we fight this? What's going on? What can we do? Nolan Higdon, a judge for Project Censored and a lecturer at Merrill College, is joining us. He is also the author of many, many books, including Let's Agree to Disagree, a critical thinking guide to communication, conflict management, and critical media literacy. Stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. The drive to get media literacy in schools is finally coming to fruition. Talk about the fight for getting this to happen and why you think California is the first place that is allowing it.
Yeah, it's been quite a long fight for educators who have been concerned about media. I mean, a lot of this dates back, quite honestly, since World War II. There's been an effort to try and get media literacy inside U.S. schools. And for the most part, those advocating for media literacy have always kind of been treated as, sort of almost outsiders in educational spaces. A lot of it has to do with kind of elitism in education. Folks think that, rather than teaching students how to operate in social media or analyze films, they should be reading the classics. We also have a lot of
they can't read now.
Decentralized education.
They don't necessarily just want them reading the classics. They don't want them to read. So having, just the destruction of the public school systems so that we don't have educated people to participate in our democracies has been alarming, shall we say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to is the political dimension of why there's been a lot of backlash to media literacy as well. There's a lot of corporations, Facebook, Apple, et cetera, who want to add media literacy to schooling, but their media literacy is just about getting students indoctrinated and socialized to using their platforms and tools. Where those of us who want to bring in a education that questions the power of those corporations and their influence in the classroom, that tends to be met with a lot of anger and resentment from educational districts and boards and administrators who are more than happy to sign contracts with these big companies for what they see as quote unquote free tools. Of course, nothing's free. They collect and weaponize student data. And they teach a very narrow
curriculum. This disturbs me greatly as the mother of a 7-year-old girl who, I tried to go no screens and then came the pandemic. So we inched in some screens there just for sanity. And also education had to be done via screens. And now when you go to school, they hand the kids an iPad saying, oh, look, we're giving, public school kids a chance, those who might not otherwise be able to afford this kind of technology, and then they give it to everyone in the school. It's sickening.
Yeah, it is quite sickening. It's also the way in which it's advertised, right? If I told you tomorrow that the government was going to come around and put a tracking device in every student's pocket, you guys would be organizing for revolution. But when corporations do it under the auspice of education, all of a sudden everybody's gung-ho to do it. And I think it's a way of kind of informing, teachers and students and parents that these devices are not free. These companies are not altruistic. It's a profit-making motive to get students used to these tools and to surveil them constantly, to collect their data and analyze their data and things like that. The irony, though, of that point is a media literacy would be the exact type of classroom that would wake students, parents, and teachers up to that reality. But we simply just don't have that infrastructure. And we're an outlier. A lot of the Western world and Asia and North Africa, they took this media literacy thing very seriously by the 1990s. We did not. We saw this big cultural shift in how we use media, and we didn't add anything to our education structure to compensate for that.
What would a media literacy curriculum look like in a high school?
I think, there's media literacy has a lot of elements to it. So it depends on the classroom. So I do a lot of training with teachers. One of the first things I tell teachers is, I'm not here to add more work to your schedule. There's assignments you're already doing that could be replaced with a media literacy component. So you could teach the same things, the same skills, and also get media literacy. But at its very basic sense, you want to teach students to start questioning all the media they analyze. You want to disabuse of this idea that, oh, it's just entertainment, or this is objective. Everything has a message. Everything has some bias in it. Everything has some purpose behind it. And as a media user, once you realize that, you can start to see how and why a media producer is trying to shape your perception of something. This could be as small as like a film where the message is, love conquers all. So it can be good messages. Of course, there's more pernicious uses as well. Like we know the military is heavily involved in the production of films in the United States to give a happy face.
That explains a lot. Sorry about that. That explains a lot.
Yeah, it started in the 1980s, when the public opinion of the military was at a nadir with after Vietnam. The military started getting involved in telling companies like, hey, you can use the coolest, newest military equipment in your film, but we get to check the script. And this was true for, Top Gun, the original, and Red Dawn, and all the military films since then. So, it's important to teach students, like when you go watch these films, you can enjoy them. We all get pleasure from media and entertainment, but just know that, the military is funding this to indoctrinate you. How does that impact your perception of this film?
Let me ask you something that might be a little off book here. When you are going into the schools to teach the teachers how to teach media literacy, are they by and large media literate themselves? Or are they kind of shocked at the kind of, do they have an awakening moment while you're teaching it?
It depends. I mean, there's usually an awakening moment. You have to think when I come in to talk about media to non-media literacy educators, they generally have a happy view of media. They get a lot of pleasure from social media, and using Google is very convenient, and they love films and all these kinds of things. So to come in and kind of show the different motives for the creation of those platforms and content, you're kind of a wet blanket. But
you're like, this is military propaganda.
But that's why, I also encourage in those trainings that, media literacy is not about protecting students from media. It's about teaching students how to use media more responsibly. So it's important to pose questions in the classroom. Like, if the social media we have now is not really social, what would an actual social media look like? What would an internet culture look like that actually benefited our society and benefited your world? So I think playing with those questions to remind students that media doesn't have to be what it is. It could be anything. And that's a very important part of a media literacy education.
Well, that's what we try to do here at the Political Voices Network. We're trying. So hopefully we're succeeding at that. Have you had pushback from, say, any kind of political pushback? I noticed that this is landing first in California, which would be one of our more progressive states in the country. Any kind of political pushback? I recognize there'd be corporate pushback, but have they merged in order to make this about the woke agenda?
Well, they've definitely pushed back, they being corporations and politicians, on a lot of the work that I and others in my community do. Especially in these times where corporate America has consumed so much of the public space. When we come in and we critique corporate influence on the classroom, we're almost seen as anachronistic, almost like we came from like the New Deal era or something. So there's a lot of pushback. And in a state like California, it's particularly difficult because Silicon Valley funds the majority of politicians. So when we go in and talk to these politicians, they may agree with us, we may be convincing, but we don't have, billions of dollars to throw at them. So that disqualifies us. But as far as, educators go, when you spend time with educators, they get it. I mean, when you're in the classroom, they understand how curriculum can be manipulated. And so it's not a big jump when talking to teachers, but politicians is very, difficult. You really have to start at, shall we say, kind of an earlier or more simplified explanation of media literacy before you can get into some of the details of why this corporate influence is so problematic for our students.
When I teach media studies as well. When I first started teaching, it was in the, God, to age myself here, but the Jon Stewart host of Comedy Central's Daily Show era. And he was one of the first who was doing basically media literacy critiques. And, one of the things he did was got us all to have a critical look at what was happening in the media. And then it seems to have gone completely berserk and haywire, where half the population, or more than half, for good reason, people don't trust the corporate media given the corporate forces behind it. But now people seem to trust no media other than, say, Joe Rogan or some of these people who come off as being independent, do your own research types. What could you speak a little bit to this phenomena that is happening here? There's got to be good and bad to it because people are on the lookout for it, but now some of them were easily captured by the right-wing rabbit holes.
Yeah, and I think, and I agree with that. And I think this is something that a lot of commentators missed in the Trump era. When Trump said fake news and people were deriding all journalists as fake news, there was all this attention to blame Donald Trump for that. I saw it totally different. I saw it as, look, you guys have failed in your First Amendment responsibility, and this grifter, being Donald Trump, is just simply taking advantage of it and exploiting it for himself. He didn't create this problem. He's just weaponizing it for his own ends. And so I think that the press has to start taking a lot more responsibility. They seem to often lambast and get frustrated with audiences for not knowing what the truth is or not believing their message. I turn that around and say, well, what have you done over the last 20, 30, 40 years to lose that trust? I mean, I'm a product of that lost trust. I was a college student in the run-up to the second invasion of Iraq in 2003, and watching the media lie and manipulate people to support a war that we shouldn't be in, and the death of and displacement of over 1 million Iraqis. That was a powerful message to me. I wanted to know more about media and propaganda, and I developed a skepticism for media. That wasn't something that some right-wing demagogue taught me to do. I learned from my own experience, and that's squarely on the back of media. So that's I think a problem. But I think solutions are starting to emerge, and and you're in this space as well. But I'm really excited about what's happening in a lot of the online spaces. The fragmentation of media has some problems in that it can allow non-authentic, non-researchers to create narratives that people believe. But on the other hand, we're seeing people attracted to these new voices, even voices they disagree with, just simply because they offer an alternative interpretation that's authentic. And I think this is why so many audiences gravitate toward Joe Rogan. I hardly think he has a monopoly on truth, but he does come off authentic. He does come off like as inquisitive. I think a lot of people in the online space do that, and that's attractive versus the corporate media that always acted like experts, and they knew it, even when they were consistently getting things wrong one right after the other.
I don't even know if they were getting it wrong. I mean, the run up to the war and the basic front page lying about weapons of mass destruction from the New York Times, the paper of record, it's hard for me to believe that they got that wrong. Or that, it's this fuzzy connection between oops, did we make a mistake? Or oops, all of the corporations of which we are connected, tied to, advertise with us, are pushing for war.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if you're, as a lot of people learned in 2003, if you're one of the voices who's against the war, 2002, 2003, you get kicked off the air. I mean, that happened to Donahue, right. That happened to Jesse Ventura, more or less happened to Chris Hedges, although there was other issues there. But these folks got removed, and those people who stayed on the air and used official sources and didn't challenge the war, you kept your job. So the incentives are clearly to go with what the majority is saying. And I think that still happens today in a litany of areas.
Nolan Higdon, you are a judge for Project Censored. Project Censored just came out with a podcast, did they not?
Well, they have their radio show they release in podcast form as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. I don't know why I'm so behind on knowing about that, but I was thrilled when I saw it scroll up in my Twitter feed. So very happy to see that. Will you still be coming out with the most censored stories of the year?
Yes. So the project still is running strong. Globally, we get hundreds of stories that students and faculty submit, and the top 25 go in the book every year. And there's tons of other great chapters and articles from original writers in the book analyzing media from the previous year. So it like we always say at the project, unfortunately, we remain relevant.
Yeah, unfortunately, you remain relevant. Well, I'm grateful that you have it. We always cover it every year, and it's great to have you on the program. Any final thoughts as we move into this potential new ground of having media literacy taught at least one school in California?
Yeah, I think with so much discussion right now about so-called life skills in schools, I think media literacy is clearly a life skill. Polls show people are using media between 10 and 14 hours a day in some
Wow.
facilities.
Are there that many hours in a day?
I guess
How
I
many
guess
are left after
when they're
that?
not sleeping. Yeah. So it's a major part of people's lives. So I encourage, especially parents, to kind of look at some of this curriculum. What is being taught about media, or all the power dynamics of media being investigated. Encourage your kids to ask media about media. I still say the best media lesson I received when I was a young kid. I was begging my mom to buy something after a commercial I saw, and she told me, "You can't always trust those commercials. That thing probably doesn't work." And I was like, "Wow, like commercials lie." So it's one of those.
I went to the grocery store with my daughter, and she was like, "Can I have some of those? Whatever they were, brightly colored, packaged, whatever." And I said, "Well, those are poison, basically." I'm like, "It's sugar, pesticides, and they fry it all together." And she goes, "Well, why do they sell it then?" And I think she was 4, So anyway, I study this kind of thing anyway, so maybe it rubbed off, but
That's a good media literacy lesson, though. I mean, I think that's the kind of like important work that we don't often value, but those kinds of little conversations, I think, are very, very impactful, and I hope we have more of them.
it's really these critical thinking skills that I think the power of corporate influence into our schools, they don't really want critical thinkers pressed out of there. They want people to just go deliver the Amazon goods and then buy them. That's it. That's what they're pressing out of our schools. So you're doing, happy to hear your comment about that, but I just want to say that, just to move this kind of thinking into schools. You get it in colleges a lot, but not everybody goes to college. I think it's great what you're doing to move this forward into the education system in the U.S. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. And I hear you. Yeah, so much of schooling, especially higher ed, has been focused on job preparedness, and I agree that basically what they want to produce is obedient workers versus critical thinkers. But we should also remember that another purpose for education was serving the public good and making good citizens. And whether you like it or not, media influences the way you think about your government, your society, and your culture. And so being media literate can help you be a better participant in your democracy. And so we need to also remind ourselves that the purpose of education is to serve our democracy, not just job skills.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming on the program. I really appreciate it. Nolan Higdon, lecturer at Merrill College. You have so many books. Are those all your books? I'm on vacation right now. So my normal library has 4 of your books in it.
Oh, wow.
But did you write all those ones behind you?
Oh no, these are all just the ones I read. They're for show.
It's actually like a sheet. You pull it down, and it's cool.
I rent them for every
Thanks so
interview.
much. I appreciate you coming on, really. Thanks so much.
Take care. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
You too. Take care. You're watching the Julianna Forlano Show on the Political Voices Network. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in to the Julianna Forlano Show podcast. You can follow me on Twitter if you're new to the Political Voices Network. On YouTube, go there. There's a lot of great talkers there. There's other folks like me, not like me, but I'm definitely there. So subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, all the things that you do when you're on YouTube. And if you're listening to me on one of the many podcast platforms where you can find me, definitely subscribe to me there too. I appreciate it. I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. I am on every Friday. And also I do some newscasts over on the YouTube at Political Voices during the week. I mean, there's a writer's strike going on. There's a dearth of comedy. If you need some, come to me.